there. Hello and welcome to Focus on Fantasy Romance, episode 17, a podcast where we discuss books, genre, industry, and our geeky lives. I am A.R.D. Clerk. I am joined by Elle Klaus.
Hey.
Paulina Woods. And Ishabelle Torrey. Today, in episode 17, we are actually going to review a book. The name of the book is Betrayal's Price. And Elle has a picture on the screen. Author is Lisa Blackwood. And I will read you very quickly the Amazon blurb. For some, rebirth is not a reward. Centuries ago, the gods demanded Ashayna Stonemantle sacrifice her demon-tainted lover. She did, and then ended her own life, but it didn't fulfill her obligations to the gods. Born into a new body, Ashayna has no awareness of her former life until her sentient magic manipulates her into seeking out Sorntar, crown prince of the Phoenix. The majestic and charismatic Sorntar reveals that she is host to a Larnkin, a spirit creature of vast power. If she can trust the word of a man who is part avian, he is host to her Larnkin's other half. When their Larnkins awaken early and force them into an unbreakable bond, Ashayna and Sorntar are accused of being corrupted by an ancient evil. To prove their innocence, they must discover what happened in the past to pit bondmate against bondmate. As the search for the truth draws them closer together, Ashayna realizes she's falling in love with Sorntar. But before she can tell him, his tainted Larnkin enslaves him. The gods demand she kill her beloved, as she did once before, but she will not do it, even if it's the only thing that will keep her soul safe from his darkness. So, that is a very long, drawn-out blurb. So, Betrayal's Price is labeled a sword and sorcery fantasy. I felt like it had some romantic...
This is a romance. This is a fantasy romance. I don't know why she doesn't have it in the fantasy romance category, but she has it listed.
Romance. It starts out with two characters. It goes through an entire romantic arc, and then it has an ending that is technically probably happy for now. Spoilers.
Spoilers, the whole thing.
Spoilers. The whole thing is going to be a spoiler. But this is book one of a longer series, so at this point, we're going to leave it at happy for now. But I have a feeling that it's going to be a happily ever after because she has created such a really strong romance bond thing in this book. So I'll start with my perception of the story. So I enjoyed the story. I don't particularly feel like I was attached to any one particular character. I liked the heroine, and the hero was okay, and they had a pretty good adventure. And so, in the long run, I thought it was a good fantasy romance novel. What I particularly liked the best, what drew me the most in the story was the way that the author gave you hints about what had happened to these characters in the past kind of throughout the book until you get to the point where you sort of learn their secret past and, this big secret that's revealed. And the heroine has to do something magical and fantastic to save her beloved, which was good. And I enjoyed that part, and the action scenes were good, and I thought it kept up a good pace. And the world building was pretty good. So all in all, I was pleased with it. I read it pretty quickly. It wasn't very complicated as far as having tons and tons of characters to remember their names. Sometimes that really bothers me, and I have to go back and say, okay, so this is, character A, and he's B's brother, but daughter, he's cousin to whoever. So, yeah, there weren't a lot of characters to get to know or anything like that. It focused mostly on the main characters, so that part I enjoyed. What about you, Elle? What were your feelings on the book?
I really liked it when I got to the ending. When I first started it, because I read on my breaks at work, I would read a chapter and put it down, and I didn't have the strong compulsion to pick it up until I was probably about halfway through. But I did really enjoy pushing to the end. I like the magic system that the author created with the Larnkins. And I'm going to stumble over everyone's names because, as I mentioned before, when I read a book, I kind of fix the names in my head. I'm like, so some of the names were actually kind of chunky for me to pronounce or say in my head. So things got truncated or simplified, or I threw out consonants just to make things flow better. So, and I thought there was too many names or things that started with similar letters. So I was getting confused because there was a character name of, I think, Lamara, and Ashayna's previous incarnation started with an L, and then there's the Larnkins, and then there's L something else that's the other half of the Larn. Yeah, so I mean that got a little confusing. It would have been helpful if the author had just picked different names that were not so similar. I really like Sorntar. I told you I'm gonna butcher a name. I don't know. He was just really. I really like characters that are extremely powerful and in control of themselves. I don't like. It's hard to explain. Like they make a conscious effort to be gentle when they don't have to be, and I really liked him. I had a hard time relating with Ashayna because she has this deep-rooted fear of magic, but I didn't ever feel the fear of the magic. I felt the fear for other things that were going on around her, and you know, the fear of falling in love and whatnot. But like, I didn't actually feel the fear of magic, and this is supposed to be her hurdle throughout the whole book, is her getting over this fear. And like, I just don't feel it. And like I said, this is a fantasy romance, but it is not. It's not in Amazon as such, but if you look at the bottom of the blurb, it does say that it's a fantasy romance, sword and sorcery. And I looked at book 2, which is the Herd Maiden, and I had a suspicion when I heard the name of it that it is Ashayna's sister and these horse-like magical creatures, the Santherian. Yep, I'm saying it wrong. Horse-like creatures, and so I'm pretty sure that's her book. And then there's one about the dead queen or something like that. And so I'm like, this is totally fantasy romance. And she's just, I don't know, like me, she's in denial about what she's reading.
So let me ask you a question. So one of the things that interested me, but also made it a little bit difficult for me to relate to the characters, were the fact that they're actually different species. So
right.
They're extremely different. Like he has human upper torso, but he has all these avian features, and you know, he has like he has tail feathers, and he has large wings, and he has talons, and he has, you know, a plumage on top of his head, and so I'm sitting here trying to imagine, you know, what this character looks like, and I find it really hard for myself to feel like I was finding him attractive, because it took me so long to picture in my head what he looked like. He wasn't fully a human, you know what I mean? So like,
right.
I had to think about it for a while before I could, you know, she's talking about how he's sexy and he's all these things, and I'm like trying to think past the feathers and the talons and
yeah, it took a little bit of, it was kind of jarring when, so you introduce a character and you're automatically, like, the reader will automatically think, you know, male or female, but they're like me. So I read a book, I think they're a white person, male or female, whatever. So I get this image in my mind, like the first page that I'm introduced to this character, and then suddenly they have feathers. And suddenly they're much taller than I thought they were, because I had no detail. And suddenly they've got talents. So yeah, like, you kind of, when you're introducing a new species, a new race of people, you really have to get the details in quick, because the reader will fill in the details, and then when they read something that's different than what they thought, it throws them out of the story. And that makes for it, sometimes people won't even finish. I'm like, oh, well, what is this? I'm gonna put it down, or, you know. So it was kind of jarring. I was able to look past most of it, but that's because, like I said, I willfully fill in the blanks. Like, if I don't like something, we'll just fix it. I'll change their name, or they don't actually have that feature, or I'll just ignore it.
Yeah, it took me a little bit, and like you, at the beginning of the book, I felt was a little bit slow, and I was learning all these magical creatures in this magical world and all these things. But by the end, I cared enough about what happened to the two characters to get past the fact that one of them isn't technically completely human, or human at all. Actually, is a phoenix, but still. So like, yeah, it took me a little bit, I think, to kind of build up to, you know, that. And you're right, because when readers read books, they immediately in their mind what they picture is someone very much like them, or what's attractive to them. You know, it's not necessarily what the author has in mind as attractive, but what the reader is like, oh, well, his name is so and so, and he must look like this because that's what I think is attractive.
Right.
So, okay, so I know that Paulina had some issues with the book, and I wanted her to tell us why.
Yay, my turn. I'm just kidding. So one, I downloaded it, it wouldn't open. I downloaded it again, wouldn't open. Deleted it, downloaded it again, it wouldn't open. Finally read it on my computer. But I think the feeling I got when it's a did not finish for me. So I'm not gonna go into characters and all this stuff, but you know, for me a book has to grab me from the very beginning. And this one, it just didn't get my attention. I kind of found myself going flip, flip. And then I had to go back and think, was this book one? Because it started out as almost the middle of a series. Like I felt like I was missing something when I first read it. So then if I have to keep thinking back and I lost the story, unfortunately. So yeah, didn't finish. Sorry. The cover is pretty.
I do have to say that with the technical problems, that may not be the author's fault. Sometimes Amazon F's things up. I know the great Amazon is impervious to error, but yeah, sometimes Amazon.
Oh, I'm not blaming. I'm not even blaming the author for that one. I'm just saying I think I just had problems from the beginning. The thing was, my do not finish was it didn't grab me. It just didn't. I was so distant from the book because I kept thinking I was missing something, like I should have read something before, that I kind of didn't. And from what you guys say, that, you know, she said it all throughout the book, but I just felt like I was missing something in the beginning, and so I didn't connect with the authors.
I have to agree with you, Paulina, about that feeling, though, because she picks up the reader and dumps them, basically, in the middle of this magical world with your main character running. And you have no idea what she's running from, anything like that, you know, and then all of a sudden she tells you that wolves in armor are coming out of the trees. So you're like, oh. So it is very much like there is no historical background or context for where the book picks up. So I do agree with you in that. I liked the world enough and was interested enough to find out what happened that I kept reading, but I can see how some readers would get put off by that because they're like, I don't know what the heck's going on here. Like, if some people, if they're not immediately hooked by, you know, what they're reading, then they can't get hooked.
Yeah, and I think going along that line, I didn't care about if she was caught or not because I didn't know her. So, like, when she was running, and I cared more about the horse. I was like, hey, let the horse run away. Don't let the horse get eaten. So, I mean, yeah. I like the horse.
One thing that I did very much enjoy, and we actually had talked about this a little bit before, was the formatting for this book is gorgeous. And I actually had the same problem that Paulina did. It would not load past the blurb on my Kindle Fire. I actually had to read it on my phone. Even though I deleted it from my carousel and re-downloaded it, it still would never page past the blurb on my Kindle Fire. But on my phone, it read fine, and I thought that the formatting was gorgeous. And what's nice about it is that there are all these little curly cues and pictures, and if I can find one, I'll kind of show it to you, where it kind of picks up, okay, like, yeah, like that, like what Elle has up on the screen right now. It's just really pretty, and here's, I'm not sure you can see, but here's a chapter heading, and it has the little bird, and it has all the curly cues and the pretty, and I like the pretties. I mean, I was like, oh, this is a really pretty book. Beyond, you know, what the words were saying, I just thought it was really pretty. And I think the author did a good job making it look professional like that. I think it was very professionally put together. So I did enjoy that a lot.
I think that was done in Vellum. Have you heard of Vellum?
I have heard of it. I have never played around with it, though.
Yeah, I can't play around with it because it's specific for Mac and I use PC. And they have
true.
no,
I don't have a Mac either.
Right, they have no intention of coming out with a PC version because they're like, oh, we just keep adding new stuff to the Mac version and we don't want to split our attention. I'm like, well, I guess you don't want my business, jerks.
Right, that sounds right.
But I think that could probably be Vellum.
Mac rules.
I'm an Android Windows person pretty much all the way. But so yeah, so that's one thing that I did like about the book, despite the fact that I couldn't read it on my Kindle Fire, which is probably an Amazon goof. I don't know. Some kind of
I wonder if all that Uber formatting just messed with the Amazon's whatever to download it. Wonder if that affected it.
Then it would affect everything. Not like, because I read mine on my phone. I read all my ebooks on my phone because I always have it with me. I have a Kindle, I just don't use it. But it shouldn't have made a difference between loading it on a Kindle and loading it on my phone.
Oh, I do have to add.
Same file.
I do have to add that when I read it on my computer and I went back to my phone, it says furthest read was 22 on the other device. Do you want to start there? And I said yes, and all of a sudden now it flips. So it just might be, like you said, Kindle acting up, being stupid.
A glitch. Something's going on there.
Yeah.
I tried to open it before we started this. I tried to open it on my phone, and it wouldn't open in my phone's Android.
Weird.
I want to discuss really quickly, we had touched on this earlier, but I think we're all in agreement, well, those of us that read the book or finished the book are probably all in agreement that the author has this book shelved probably or is missing some categories where this book could be shelved. Because we're all fantasy romance readers and we're also all fantasy romance authors, and we know a lot of, I don't know if she's trying to, by putting it in, I don't even know what category it's in, probably just straight fantasy or epic fantasy maybe.
I can tell you.
Elle's going to tell us. But I don't know if she's trying to appeal to male readership by not having it shelved in fantasy romance. Because it does have some action in it and things like that, but primarily, in my opinion, this is fantasy romance. I think she's missing out on a big group of readers who would read this book if it was shelved in fantasy romance.
There's science fiction, fantasy, /fantasy/epic, and sword and sorcery. Yeah.
So no mention of romance.
Is it
in the blurb? It's in the blurb. It's hard to say. Well, the publisher is listed as Lisa Blackwood, so I would assume yes.
Well, too, I also wondered if, because it did not have a written in stone happy ever after, if she thought she couldn't put it in romance.
There's a lot of misconception about genre.
Technically didn't have a happy for now either. Spoiler alert, it wasn't her beloved who was kind of in control of the body at the time, but off and on throughout the end of the book, he was in control and he wasn't and he was and he wasn't. So I don't know if maybe she felt like it wasn't enough of the happy ever after, the happy for now to satisfy romance readers.
I would say it's the happy for now. I mean, it definitely has resolution. Like, it's an emotionally satisfying ending to me.
Right.
Like, because they resolve the big problem. I mean, there's an overall arch that's probably going to be resolved over the series, but that couple, they reach their conclusion that, hey, they're together and they're in love. So
right, exactly. I felt the same way. I didn't see any reason why I, as a fantasy romance reader, would be disappointed with the way the book ended. Yeah, so I'm not really sure what the author was thinking about when she decided not to put it in romance.
Maybe she didn't want to compete with romance. Romance is one of the biggest markets.
yeah, it is a huge genre.
It is. And, well, and fantasy in general is a huge genre, and especially if you choose epic fantasy, you're getting into another huge genre, but fantasy romance in general is giant. I can see where that could be a consideration, too.
So this is what's considered secondary world fantasy. And I write secondary world fantasy, like Stealing the Wolf Prince is secondary world, because it's not Earth in the capacity that we understand it. And a lot of people don't understand that's what fantasy mostly is. There's urban fantasy, which is kind of a relatively new branch from fantasy, but most people, when they think fantasy, secondary world. So whenever you go to the actual fantasy romance category on Amazon, it is just littered with not secondary fantasy romance books. It's all paranormal. Like urban fantasy can be there, that's totally fine, but it's mostly paranormal stuff. And maybe she didn't want to put herself in that genre per se, because it is overrun with vampires and Twilight nonsense. Ishabelle
something to say.
is waving at me. You have to unmute yourself.
In the blurb, it says it's a romance, doesn't it? In the blurb?
Yes, yes.
Well, you know what, when you put words like that in your blurb, those do count towards keywords. I've actually done some extensive reading on that. So it is probably in romance. She probably just didn't check it into the main categories underneath, figuring that romance would be picked up underneath the blurb. And if that's the case, that just means that she's not getting romance readers. That just, hold on, that just means, where are her stats? That means that people are finding it through the sword and sorcery fantasy, not through romance, is what that means. So maybe she did target romance, because she does put it in her blurb, and just there's so much fantasy romance, it's buried.
Maybe that is one strategy also that they recommend in the promo author groups, is to kind of get yourself in as many categories as you can, just for visibility.
Speaking as someone who has been known to write in some really tiny niche genres, like steampunk romance is absolutely minuscule, and I know Elle writes some steampunk romance too. Visibility factor is great in the smaller categories, but you have very limited readership of people who are going to go out and actually search for steampunk romance and then find you. So if you also put your book in alternate history, and you put your book into, time travel, if that's it, or magic or magical realism, if you find those other categories that stack up to, or I'll do science fiction, I'll do steampunk, I'll do science fiction and fantasy, I'll do alternate history, and I'll sometimes do magic and witches and wizards, just those other category keywords that can bring readers to your small niche too. Paulina has something to say.
Yes. On that topic of putting yourself in smaller niches and stuff, I know that we're all part of the group that does a lot of helping of authors, and one of the posts said something about in the superheroes, they're noticing there's more vampires and werewolves, and they're not superheroes. Like, people are starting to place their books in the smaller areas, but that pushes the real books down kind of below. Like, okay, if I go searching for, I want someone who has super strength, and all of a sudden I have like 100 books on vampire. I'm like, well, I don't want to read about vampires. You know, I want to read about something like Jesse Cage. No, wait, sorry. I just pronounced his name wrong. Anyways.
Luke Cage.
Yeah, thank you. Luke Cage. Like, you know, I want to read somebody like him. I don't want to read a vampire. So, you know, they saying that a lot of the smaller genres are now getting overrun by authors who are trying to pick up on those readers that are looking for something totally different. But, I mean, if you go looking for it and you get like 7-8 pages of something else, you're more likely to just, hey, I want to read something. Let's see what we have. So I think a lot of authors are actually doing that, which I think is kind of wrong. Because I could place mine in, I don't know, mages. I should and see what happens.
Well, that's the thing, though. You know, be truthful about what the book is about. That's like Wild Moon. Okay, Wild Moon has werewolves. It has magic. It's futuristic because it has high tech from the future. It has all these things. I chose magical realism as the very top group, which is a shithole of a category to try to ever get a foothold in. Magical realism is so huge. I had to be at like number 9,000 overall in the Kindle store to make the top 100 in magical realism.
Really?
That's how many people are in that category. Yes. So it wasn't until Wild Moon with a huge promo got to the, like, I think it was like 9,851 in the Kindle store overall to even get to like number 100 in magical realism. So I knew that was a huge category. So I had to do like werewolves and shifters, another giant category, and magic, wizards, and witches, mages, or something else. I don't know. But like I had to pick like a giant category, and then I picked some smaller, you know, more niche-y categories because I knew that magical realism was a void, just a giant black void of thousands upon thousands of books that may or may not be about magical realism. I have no clue. But I didn't realize when it went into the magical realism category that it was actually that hard to get a foothold in that category ever.
Well, if you think about it too, if you've got someone who is actually browsing down through Amazon and says, okay, I want a really good fantasy romance, and they go in there, or no, like time travel romance, and like the whole top 100 or whatever is the Outlander stuff, and that's technically time travel, but there's so much other stuff in that genre that could be floating to the top, but it's just saturated. Maybe that wasn't a good example, but like Paulina said, the superhero stuff that people are throwing in vampires. Well, vampires aren't superhero; they're a paranormal creature. Like they don't have superpowers because they're, you know, bitten by a spider or saturated with gamma radiation. They're vampires. It's just, you got someone, if they're looking for something specific to that genre, they find a book, buy it, and it's not that genre, the reader's going to be mad.
Yeah, I read time travel, so I actually do get mad about that. Like, I love time travel, and I have learned when I search to go down to the 10th page and then start from there. Because if you don't, you just get a lot of just crap. I'm like, how do you even make that think you're doing time travel? No, time travel isn't getting in an airplane and traveling. That's not time travel. Like, they find ways around it. I'm just like, just go to the 10th page, because that's usually where you'll start finding the real time travel books where, you know, the people actually travel from here to ancient Egypt, which is time travel.
One of the categories that I think lately I've been seeing that people are putting books that absolutely do not belong there is YA. There are so many overly mature books that should probably be a new adult, because you're talking about, you know, characters who are quite a bit older than what you would typically see in YA, and some of the covers are literally on the verge of being erotica. And if my daughter went on Amazon and searched for, you know, Divergent series, which is, you know, in YA, and she comes up with like 2 pages of a whole bunch of stuff that, you know, looks like it should be in the back of a video store with a sign that says 18 plus, I'm going to be pissed because that's not YA. And you can call it YA all you want, but it's new adult. You're talking about college age students. You're talking about early 20s. You know, they're doing all the things that people who are in their 20s do. And that's cool because I was in my 20s and I did that stuff too. But I don't want my 14-year-old who reads YA to be reading that stuff. So people are not paying attention to that.
I think now I have no doubt there's some people doing that on purpose, but I think a lot of people don't know the difference between YA and NA. And new adult is such a new genre. Yeah, people just aren't grasping that it's a step up from YA. It's older children, but not quite, you know, mature adults yet for the most part. So I think that's where a lot of those listings comes from. And I know that just based on some of the editing I've done for people. They're like, well, this is, you know, YA-ish. And I'm like, oh, no, no, it's not. You know, well, the characters are between the right age. And character is. What they're doing is not YA. So I think that comes with the confusion and what you're seeing there. I don't think for the most part it is a deceptive practice. I think a lot of new authors especially don't know the difference.
I had an author friend of mine. My characters in Stealing the Wolf Prince, I think they're like 25, which is the very end of new adult. But she's like, hey, your characters fit within the new adult genre. You should try marketing it as new adult. I'm like, there's no coming of age, really. And that's more what new adult and young adult is for, is coming of age in that age, in the specific age bracket. So I'm like, just because I've got my characters in that age group doesn't mean it applies, especially because they don't go to college. They're in the secondary world. They don't have the same social structure. So, although I mean, I guess I could technically do that. Like it wouldn't be right to my readers to put it in that category because it wouldn't meet genre expectations. I'd probably get a bunch of 1-star reviews because, hey, this is not young adult or new adult, excuse me.
Right. Well, and when new authors start, that's one of the advices that you're given is, hey, if you want to know what category to put your book in, go look at the top 100 books in this category. Well, if somebody's already fudged to the top 100 books in this category and you're like, oh yeah, my book fits in, you know, right in with all these, but they really shouldn't be in that category, then you're getting confused. So it is hard as a new author, especially, to know where you're supposed to put stuff and where a reader's most likely to find you, and where can you put it so that they don't get pissed off when they pick up your book and it's not what, you know, you thought you were calling it when you labeled it that. And so yeah, and it's hard because, you know, my publisher will say, come up with 8 to 10 keywords that, you know, most describe your book. And I'm like, that's really hard because, you know, I'm a genre masher anyway, you know. And so I'm doing fantasy, witches and wizards, werewolves and shifters, magical realism, fantasy romance, steampunk, you know, alternate timeline, alternate history, and it's time travel, but not really. So I always X that one out because they're not really time traveling. And, you know, all these things. And then I'm like, and then I have to go through and say, okay, it's not this. Check that one off. It's not this. Check that one off because, you know, I could technically label it those things, but it's not really that. So it gets very difficult, especially when you don't have those firmly drawn lines, you know, like Judge and Jury is absolutely 100% paranormal romance, except the hero comes from another dimension, another planet across the universe from far, far away, and he's thousands of years old. Technically, it's science fiction romance, but she's a witch. So technically it's paranormal. So, you know, so I just kept it in paranormal, and I'm like, it's got witches in it. They don't, you know, you don't have to get too concerned about where he came from because she's a witch, and, you know, it happens on Earth, and you don't have to travel to any other planets or get in a spaceship, so we'll stay away from science fiction. but technically it could be in science fiction, but it's not. So when you start playing around with those things and you start adding all these little pieces of things, then you're like, well, shit, where does this go now? Because, you know, somebody who hates science fiction is going to pick up my book and say, this guy's an alien. Well, he looks human. Good enough. You know, so it gets really hard, and I understand how things can end up in wrong categories. And Paulina, where do your gargoyles fall? Like, are they monsters? You know what I mean? Because I think there's probably a monster romance category.
No, they're not
monsters. I'm just asking.
Jeez.
They're unhuman.
Yes, but they're not monsters.
I'm trying to be PC about these gargoyles, but
jeez, calling my babies monsters. Let me see. I actually have a hard time because there's witches, of course. There's alternative world because they have a different dimension. There's, oh God. So I put them as fantasy. I write it as fantasy romance, urban fantasy, because all of them start out in like, well, one starts out in a small town in the middle of, I can't remember, Texas, Arizona, somewhere. But then there's parts where they're in New York. In this one, you're gonna find them in California. So it's kind of urban, but then most of the fighting and stuff is done in theirs, in like, you know, in their realm. So I really don't have somewhere to put them. And that's the funny part, is that I think that's why I have a little trouble, honestly, with selling, is because they don't shift to humans. So shifter readers are like kind of turned off, but fantasy readers like it. And it's like paranormal, yes, but no, because they don't shift. They don't
are
become
from secondary
human.
world, though.
They
right?
are secondary world.
They're visiting.
But most paranormal, well, they are from Earth. Every creature came from Earth and parallel were created. But in paranormal romance, people expect to read about if it is a gargoyle, if it is a werewolf, if it is a phoenix, they shift to human form in paranormal. They expect them to be human. They're not human. They don't pretend to be human. They're the way they think, they kind of talk human because, of course, you know, they have slang and stuff, but their whole way of thinking, the whole way of doing stuff is so not human. So
do readers find that hard to have they told you that that's hard to connect to a character who's not human?
I've never had a reader tell me that. A lot of readers that read it actually come up and say, oh my God, now I see gargoyles in a whole new light.
That's good. That's a testament to your writing, because a lot of readers have a hard time connecting to inhuman species.
Well, because the way I look at it is I don't make the girls and guys who fall in love with them, I don't make them concentrate on the fact that they're not human. Like a lot of books you read where the people aren't human, there's a lot of pagan, but like where the people aren't human, a lot of the authors, they make the characters focus on that. Like, you know, oh wait, he's not human, his inhuman face is inhuman this, and I'm like, no, there's beauty in that. So they don't focus on the fact that they're not human, which I think takes away, it makes the reader not forget that they're not human, but the reader doesn't concentrate on it either. I mean, even in the sex scenes, yeah, they have wings and they have talons that they have to watch out for, but in all, they still have a little winker, and they have, you know what I mean? Like, they have all the things that they need to be human and to read. I can't wait to do the part where they have a baby with them. That's going to be funny as heck, because gargoyles have hatchlings, so they have eggs. Yes, I already wrote the scene, but I don't have trouble, but I'm looking at the side. Mythology I can try because it's alternative mythology, because it doesn't follow any, like I have gods in the beginning, but it's no gods that everybody knows. They're elemental gods. So
still mythology, regardless.
Yeah, but like I do market it. Like I think it is marketed in mythology. But I've had somebody ask me before, well, which gods, and I'm just like, mine. Like, I made them up, whatever. So, I know that one of them, I know that it's in their keywords, but maybe that's what I should do. I should mark it more mythology than anywhere else.
Because the gargoyles themselves, you may have created your own gods, your own pantheon, and that's fine. But gargoyles themselves are ancient folktale and mythos. I mean, you didn't just create them, so they fall under mythology, in my opinion.
Yeah, I never thought of that.
Well, just like when I was doing Providence, and as an homage to my husband, who's a huge H.P. Lovecraft fan, we all know Cthulhu mythos is not technically a religion. Lovecraft made it up, but in Providence, basically I took the mythos and I put it together with Norse mythology and the idea of Ragnarok. So, when the old gods rise, you're talking about gods. So, you're talking about Yala and you're talking about Yog-Sothoth and all these other, old Cthulhu and gods that are coming, but they're bringing about Ragnarok. So you can smash up your mythologies and your pantheons any way you want, but it still can go in the mythology category. Because you're talking about gods and goddesses, you're talking about a pantheon, you're talking about a belief system. Whether you created it or not, I still think it might fall within that category.
Huh. In that case, I'm going to have to go redo my keywords.
Elle, in stealing the wolf prince, your wolf, can they shift to human form, right?
Right.
So, like, when they have sex or they do intimate things, they are all in human form? Because that's something that some shifter readers are particular about, like,
I've read books where they've had sex as shifters. It's weird.
Like as a wolf? Like a wolf and a human?
Everybody that I've ever said tells me that's weird. I agree. I think that's weird. That's weird.
No, everything is off the page. So all the intimate moments where people are doing things with their clothes off, it's off the page. But in my setting, the wolfkin are born as human, and they don't actually start shifting until they hit puberty. And they mate as humans. So
right. So a lot of shifters, their wolf is a separate entity from them. Like they're two creatures that exist in the same body. Now, see, but
they're more symbiotic.
Sing does that though, and I like that. In Changelings, I like the fact that it's not like a sentient being, but it's like a what's the word I'm looking for? It's like an impulse or whatever. Impulse control, y'all. That's what we're discussing right now. So I just wondered if your shifters ever get jiggy with it or more.
Obviously they do, because they manage to procreate, but I don't write about it on the page. But back to the idea of sticking things in mythology, I should totally stick my steampunk in mythology, because the source of majestic that's going to be rising in the book is from Merlin's descendants. That's totally mythology. I am such a dunce. And guys, stop making really inappropriate comments in the chat. It's really distracting.
We're trying to have a serious discussion, and y'all are talking about terrible things over there.
You know what? Maybe mythology is a category we haven't dived into.
My
mythology,
fantasy. All of my fantasy romance they are secondary categorized as mythology.
I've never done it, and I think maybe
every time I've hit top 100 with Desolation, it's been in the mythology and mythos category.
Well, tonight I'm going to get my butt to read categorizing it. Maybe it'll help me.
People who are looking for stories about gods and goddesses aren't particularly always looking for the standard gods and goddesses they know. They're just looking for that ideal in the book that they're reading.
Well,
yeah, totally made me
like Egyptian ones, like Ish's book that's coming out, because that's going to be awesome. There's not enough Egyptian pantheon stories, in my opinion, because it's extremely interesting. And I'm totally Ancient Aliens, so I'm just telling you that you can mix a little mythology and science fiction too. So I'm
not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens.
But it was aliens.
Pretty soon my hair's going to start getting bigger.
I'm trying to go more African without doing Egyptian gods. It's harder because there's not as many written stories or verbal, but I'm lucky because I asked one of my friends who works with me. He's from Africa, so I'm asking him about his gods because they're more verbal tales in Africa than they are written.
So are you talking like? I'm not saying Haitian because Haiti is obviously not in Africa, but they have very similar pantheons and very similar tales. So are you looking at more like Nigerian? Are you looking at South Africa or the whole of?
The one group I find fascinating is Yoruba. They're actually all through Nigeria, South Africa area. It's a tribe that has now become more integrated, and their gods are pretty freaking cool. Like amazing cool. Like you're like, what? Like just their whole how creation happened is like boom, mind blown. So like I want to do them and other stories that's only verbal.
I have always been interested in that. I think that the idea of creation stories, and I like Native American mythology. It's just really overdone, especially with the wolf shifter, the whole shifter pantheon and the whole stories that you find. A lot of times they're like Native American based, and so it's hard to find something that hadn't already been touched on. But I always enjoyed that the creation story, and they're like,
Well, in Africa is because two brothers were fighting, and the Yoruba, and so I guess two brothers were fighting, and one brother the father trusted the older brother and gave him the seeds of life, and the younger brother got him drunk and stole them, and that's how humans were created. But because the father was mad because he stole them, he basically punished him to live, to forever live on Earth with the humans. It's interesting. You're just like, wait, what? Like we come from little seeds, and brothers are like, I want it. No, I want it. So I mean, it's like a family deal, and then like the evil auntie, she's where the mermaids come from. She's called the water goddess.
She sounds like
not nice.
Witch.
Yeah, but she's not nice. So it's like, what? Okay, seriously, I'm gonna just stop reading the signs.
Just stop reading the side chat.
All right.
So we had talked about where the book was placed on Amazon, and we've talked about genre, and we've talked about all those things. So we'll just very quickly, since Elle and I are the only ones that finished it, we'll just very quickly say, I enjoyed the book. I thought it was good. If you enjoy fantasy romance, this is a good fantasy romance. Ignore the spoilers, obviously, but there are some other books in the series that you could pick up and go from there. So is there anything else anyone wants to say before we close out for the night?
The cover was awesome. I will say that. The cover was beautiful.
It's just our resident cover artist. And I agree, it was very eye-catching cover.
That's actually why I downloaded it. I didn't even read the blurb. I was like, oh, okay.
But I'll tell you one thing, though. That cover does not say fantasy romance to me. There is no man on that cover at all. It is strictly the female character, and he's there, but he's the bird thing flying around her head. So I would have to say that cover is not very fantasy romance, even though the story itself is. So
if you look at it on Goodreads, it's actually got a different color, so I think she might have rebranded it with new covers, which is fine. It's totally understandable. But that cover also didn't scream fantasy romance because it was a woman standing with like a bow pointed kind of off the front. I'm like, well, that doesn't scream fantasy romance either. So, yeah.
Right. I think we're all in agreement that if you're going to have a romance cover, you should at least have a couple or outlines or something that denotes the romantic theme, whether you don't do a couple. I mean, some people don't want to put faces on their covers, and I get that, but
mine is romance, and I don't have cover people faces.
Yeah, but
so I gotta read mine,
and it's hard to say because your characters are monsters, so
They're not monsters.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Are they witches?
I'm just saying that her cover screams sword and sorcery as opposed to romance.
Right.
Your cover says witch's amulet, and there's a witch's amulet right on it, so it's pretty straightforward. It's right there. You explained exactly what the picture is right underneath it, so there's no confusion. But yeah, so okay, so I think we're gonna wrap this up tonight, unless anyone has anything else that they want to say. So thank you for joining us, everyone. If you like the podcast, please like, comment, and share. This has been episode 17.